All right. Okay. Welcome everybody to this briefing about the Learning Journeys platform and its whole approach to building lifelong learning dispositions. I'm in the Connected Intelligence Center, which is outside of the faculties here at UTS, but we work right across the university with all faculties, helping them get to grips with new kinds of tools to improve the feedback process to students and get better educational data to the faculties who want to know what's going on. Before we go any further, I just want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose ancestral lands the city campus now is. We are probably spread right across several different lands, all working from home now. And I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And today we're going to be talking about how students orient to the sometimes challenging terrain of learning and what their habits of mind are and how we can give them some insight into those habits of mind in the way that they approach or retreat from challenge and complexity and uncertainty, which of course are fundamental parts of learning. So what we're going to do is talk about learning dispositions, which is this concept that has been emerging within education for quite a while now, but it's coming more and more to the fore as the world gets more and more complex and uncertain. And it doesn't get more complex and uncertain than times like this, arguably. Dispositions are also quite tightly tied to resilience, notions of resilience. And in fact, the approach we're going to talk about is like a multidimensional perspective on how you create a resilient learner. I'm just welcoming in some new people who are just arriving a few minutes late. Welcome to Lisa and Simon. Okay, after introducing learning dispositions, I'm going to talk about learning power as a particular way of trying to make dispositions visible for reflection and discussion. Then we'll look at the particular tool that has been developed over 15 or so years of educational research as a survey diagnostic tool to provoke student reflection on their learning dispositions. And in fact, this isn't just for students, this is used in leadership development and not just university students, but in fact, originally it was developed for school students as a reaction to the kinds of assessment regimes in schools that are, well, arguably vestigial remnant from the Victorian model of schooling. And we don't have to look very far here in New South Wales to see some of the assessment regimes and the focus on grades and HSC pressure. And that paradigm of assessment was one of the triggers for the development of this whole approach in schools. And it has since spread to higher ed and into leadership development. Then we'll look at the Learning Journeys platform, which UTS is running, and talk about how you integrate this into your teaching, looking at examples from other academics who have already walked this path a little bit ahead of yourselves. Okay, so a kickoff exercise. For 1 minute, I'd like you to just open up a blank document somewhere and type in that document privately, thinking about the most effective learners that you have taught or worked with. And these aren't necessarily the academic creme de la creme, but the ones who struck you as really effective real world learners. Because we're so interested in employability and the kinds of attributes that employers are after, think about the attributes that are most likely to attract an employer's eye as well, because they need to be displaying these certain qualities. Okay, what qualities did they have? Right, So for 60 seconds, I'm going to ask you to just type that privately. And then when I ask you to, I'm going to ask you to paste that into the Zoom chat here. Okay. So 60 seconds. What words are coming to mind? Okay, all right. You've all got a little list privately. Why don't you paste that list into the Zoom chat now, and let's take a look at what we've got. Communication, resilience, empathy, teamwork, agency, bringing your whole self to the learning space, developing emotional, academic, and social intelligence, valuing different perspectives and practices and disciplines, learning and acting reflexively, able to navigate uncertainty and discomfort, that is the discomfort that's an inevitable part of learning. Resilient, adaptable, proactive, collaborative, resourceful, humble, reflective, a keen attitude, curiosity, open to try everything. Experimentation, collaborative and open, willing to ask questions. Values and encourage other students' contributions, practical and hands-on. Collaborative, curious, good listeners, resilient. We've got the same words coming up here quite a lot, haven't we? Ask questions, curious, empathy, listeners, independent, reflective, learning from mistakes, practical knowledge, aren't afraid of making mistakes, self-directed, handling ambiguity, self-aware and aware of others. Okay, thank you very much. And we can see some things coming through there. You can save that if you want to, but we're going to see a lot of these words coming back when we look at what learning power is. Okay. Learning dispositions. It strikes me as strange that in most schools and universities, we don't have a language to talk about learning to learn. That is our core business, helping people become good learners. But too often we end up wanting them simply to demonstrate they've mastered the curriculum we've taught them. And the challenge for all institutions now is figuring out how we equip students for this world out there right now, which is in chaos. And that, of course, is a huge debate within education. UTS is certainly doing better than some in the way that it thinks about transdisciplinary learning, creative intelligence, and so forth. But we don't have a good language for talking about this necessarily. And that's been widely commented on. And we need tools that are going to build our readiness to be stretched out of our comfort zones and equipped to handle uncertainty. About the only thing we can be sure the future does hold. And we might think, oh, well, that's actually learning, isn't it? Being stretched out of our comfort zones and equipped to handle uncertainty. If you're not experiencing that, then you can't really be learning very deeply, because learning is about being ready to acknowledge that you don't know the answers. But creating lifelong learners is generating some of those qualities that you've all listed there. Okay. And you could be an A-star student, but extremely brittle, not used to failure, not good at coping with failure. And you might be, academically not such an A-star student, but you're resilient, you can bounce back, you've got tenacity, and you're not afraid to step out of your comfort zone. We can go all the way back to Dewey, the great educational thinker and philosopher. 1933. Knowledge of methods alone will not suffice. There must be the desire, the will to employ them. And this desire is an affair of personal disposition. So I might know all the techniques, I might know the tools, I might have the skills, but if I choose not to use them, if I choose not to seize the opportunity when a learning opportunity presents itself, I'm not demonstrating that curiosity and openness to new experience. Gillian Katz, well known for her work on learning dispositions, again, this has been around for a while, okay? This is in 93, but she's been working on this for a long time. It's a tendency to exhibit frequently, consciously, and voluntarily a certain pattern of behavior that's directed to a broad goal. One of the most important dispositions to be listed in educational goals is the disposition to go on learning. Any educational approach that undermines that disposition is miseducation. Harsh words. But the problem is we are turning out students from high school and even university who are going through the motions but aren't demonstrating that disposition, desire to go on learning. Larry Rosenstock, an amazing school principal at High Tech High, one of the most progressive schools in the world, in my experience. It's more than knowledge and skills. For the innovation economy, dispositions come into play. And there's some of the words that you just gave us in the Zoom chat. Okay, amazing school. I had the pleasure of visiting there for 2 days, looking at how they integrate project-based learning, spanning all the disciplines. Fantastic stuff. And here's a quote from Ruth Crick, who is the inventor of learning power, the approach we're looking at today. Studying students in Australia, one of the key issues emerging was the learner's orientation towards the unknown, uncertainty, and ambiguity. You either retreat from it or you move in. The former effectively precludes deep learning, and the latter is the beginning point for it. You might say in today's trendy language, are you leaning in or leaning back when you're presented with the unknown, uncertainty, and ambiguity? If you're coming out of a certain kind of school system or a certain kind of degree program where we are not giving our students the opportunities to engage with that kind of feeling, and it's a feeling, it can feel panicky, right? You don't want to go there because you don't know if you're going to look like a fool. You don't know if everyone else is going to be much better than you. You don't know if you're going to be up for it. It's a feeling. It's very emotional. It's all tied up with your identity as well, as we'll be seeing. Okay, so we're acknowledging the deeply personal nature of really stepping out of your comfort zone. So there's a growing interest in not just knowledge and skills anymore, but dispositions, and how we cultivate these for lifelong and life-wide learning. So we're talking about relatively enduring tendencies, although there's a bit of a debate because they can also be contextual too. So there's some people believe that these are, if you're not curious, you're not curious. Personally, I think it's more contextual. You might be very curious about certain things you're passionate about and really not about others. You might be very resilient on the football pitch, but not when it's algebra. So I think there's a strong argument for a contextual nature of this. They do seem to be tied to notions of identity and agency and hope. Challenging times to feel agentic and hopeful, perhaps, at the moment. And as educators, what we're really interested in are malleable dispositions, right, that are important for developing intentional learners. So this isn't the Myers-Briggs personality test that says you're a type 1, blah, 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 learn to deal with it, all right? We're talking about malleable dispositions where if you work on something, you can change yourself, right? It's very much tied up with Carol Dweck's notion of growth mindset and the fact that you don't just believe that you've got a God-given ability or inability and that's the end of the story. But it's more than just growth mindset. And it's absolutely critical that learners can recognize that there's some truth in this story about themselves and they want to do something about it. If they're just reacting extrinsically, then we still haven't really got to where we want to get to because we're looking for intrinsically driven learners. I find this diagram quite a helpful one from Ruth Crick. You know, down here we have the knowledge that must be learned. Okay, that's the curriculum. It's led by teachers. The teacher has most of the agency. If the student is in charge, then perhaps they're busy revising the prescribed knowledge for the exam, for the assessment. Right? But then we can get up towards here, where you are tackling a local problem. It may be a very complex problem. It might be one from a company or your community or a design problem, and you actually are generating new knowledge about how to solve that problem. About what it means to implement a particular solution for a community at this time. That's new knowledge generation. And the more authentic learning gets, the closer we get to the students actually generating new insight and knowledge on the particular things they're working on, and they have to start generating these kinds of displaying these kinds of qualities. So Ruth Crick has a lot more to say about this, but she talks about teaching as learning design versus teaching as script. Okay, I'll just pause there in case anybody's got any quick questions for clarification about this whole notion of disposition.
Do we put it in the chat, our questions in the chat, or do we speak up?
Well, just ask your question, Mark. There's only a few of us, so fine.
Okay. The transition between those scripted to self-directed learning, I've been working on that ever since I've seen it a year ago, that last slide that you put up. Would you go back to it, Simon? I am trying to help a school, North Sydney Boys High, to move into this part of the window of authenticity agency, but they have been so much in this bottom teacher agency window, and now it's kind of like they're moving through the student revision up into that. It's like you don't transition directly. I think you need to move through the other windows a little bit, because you bounce about a whole lot of these. It's like the students are trying to do their own experiments, but they'll come back and ask questions to get a bit of expertise on it, or they'll go and read something, and they'll bounce around these windows.
Yeah. So as you introduce project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, it's a journey, and schools have, and educational researchers have documented how you take students on that journey. They need scaffolding, they need support. No one's pretending that they're fully fledged researchers or anything like that, but they can be given a lot more agency, and it's remarkable what students of quite a young age can accomplish when they're given that scaffolding and agency, because they're curious and they're inquiring, but they obviously need the right supports to do it. Yeah, it's a complex journey. But the schools who are deeply involved in inquiry-based learning are, for example, doing astonishing things. It's inspiring.
Do you have many examples of those in, say, New South Wales at present?
I have to come back to you on that. Yeah, not many, but there are some, and I'm not in the school sector so actively now.
Right.
Okay. Any other quick comments on dispositions as a concept? Okay, happy obviously to take follow-up questions after this session as well. All right, so learning power, in brief, is a concept that there's a lot of educational theory and stuff behind it, but after completing a 60-something survey where it asks you questions about your approach to different situations. For example, there's at least one person close to me who's helped me to learn. From 1, no, not at all like me, through to 6, very much like me. I like talking through challenging problems with friends. I need positive comments from a teacher in order to keep trying. I enjoy a challenge. Okay, so you put yourself on those Likert scales. It then generates this spider diagram which is a reflection back to you of how you see yourself. Okay, nothing more, nothing less. This is not an objective 360-degree assessment. This is how you see yourself as a learner. And we might ask the students to think about the particular experience and dispositions they have in the current subject they're studying to get that contextual nature. And you can see we've got a language here now, start talking about mindful agency, curiosity, belonging, hope and optimism, orientation to learning. Okay, so let's unpack what these things mean then, and what we do with the spider diagram. Okay, so first of all, we've got this language to talk about learning to learn, and I've seen this embed within subjects and within as the language that teachers use to remind students about the qualities they're trying to cultivate. And they are very similar to leadership qualities because we want you to become the leader of your own learning. Okay. And secondly, it's a mirror. It's a mirror for reflection. Just to help unpack those, on the left, you've got those labels, but on the right are the opposites. Okay, if you just take a look at some of those, you'll perhaps be able to imagine different students that you know, different colleagues perhaps that you know as professional colleagues, who are at different points on those different continuums. All right. And obviously, if you're hanging out on the right end of things, that's not a very healthy state to be in. And you're going to be risk averse, and you're not likely to surround yourself with people or opportunities that challenge and stretch you. Just in case you're wondering, and there's plenty more you can read about this, this is how they came up with the construct of learning power back in the early 2000s. A sort of extensive process, talking and reading and distilling from a wide range of people what make really effective lifelong learners. And then all the data was reanalyzed in about 2014-15, which led to a slight change in the naming of the scales and gave us the spider diagram that we just saw. Okay, so just to unpack what those dimensions mean, I'm going to show you, we're going to step through each one, and we're going to look at the questions in the survey that load onto each of those constructs. Okay, so if you're familiar with, the design of surveys, each question loads onto one or more constructs, which is what you're actually trying to assess. Okay, so mindful agency, as you might expect from the name, is about taking responsibility for your learning, how you manage your feelings, your time, your energy, your actions, having a sense of purpose. We hear that word a lot increasingly, both in learning and in companies, purpose-driven organizations. Okay, the kinds of questions come from three sub-dimensions there around agency, managing feelings, and managing processes. Okay, and you can see the kinds of questions there which are loading onto this notion of mindful agency. Okay. Hope and optimism. That seems like a funny thing to find in an educational survey, perhaps, but it has a very particular meaning. It's about your hope and optimism about yourself as a learner, not just about the world in general. Okay. It's helped by having a positive learning story you can reflect on. You have a sense of having come a long way or made progress, and a sense of being able to go places with your learning. Okay, so again, it's obviously tied to a notion of agency, but this came out as a distinctive aspect. And just three questions there in the scale, in the survey, about, again, to what extent is this a little like you or a lot like you? Okay. Sense making, a word we also hear a lot about. It's about making those connections between things you knew in the past, things you're seeing now, seeing patterns, and also connecting to your own story of where you've come from and where you feel you're going. So it's all about making connections between the material and who you are and what you know. And you can see the kinds of questions there. Again, is this a little bit like you or a lot like you? Curiosity, that came up a lot in the Zoom chat. Getting beneath the surface, asking why, etc. And those are the 4 questions in the survey around that. Okay. Creativity, again, we're not talking about creativity in general or artistic creativity or anything very, highbrow. We're talking here about knowing how to use your imagination and your intuition. Being playful, holding ideas lightly. Knowing when to put something aside and then come back to it later because you know your unconscious mind is going to be working on it anyway. And it works in a very different way from the way when you're just racking your brains and thinking about something in a very analytical kind of way. Okay, you can see quite a lot of questions there around imagination, intuition, and being playful with opportunity, possibilities. Collaboration, we hear so much about that these days. This is about learning through your relationships with others, having a network you can turn to, enjoying talking about problems with other people, and generating ideas again. So some people really enjoy that, other people don't. Okay, but it's increasingly a competency that you need to have because it's very rare that you're going to be in any kind of job where you're just going to sit in a corner and dream up the solution on your own. The world is too complex. Okay. Belonging, a very important concept. Sense of belonging, extremely important for people to feel safe and ready to learn. Okay. 3 questions on that. It's about your sense of social support fundamentally within your job or your degree program. And then finally, there's this one called openness to learning. And it's quite a complex one, but it is this sense of, well, having the confidence and inner strength to open up. And it actually has a bunch of questions there around to what extent you have a submissive mindset or dependence on other people. And as you'll see, when we look at the diagram again, this is actually a scale. This is the scale at the top. And you don't really want to be at either end of the scale. You want to be somewhere in the middle. Okay.
Simon, where is this scale that you're talking about?
Okay, the scale is...
It's going back to the spider web.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
This one here. So at one end of the scale, it's called rigid persistence. It's this sort of just not knowing when to give up and try a different tack. Just banging your head against the brick wall. You're being very resilient, but this is not a productive kind of resilience. Down at the other end is a sense of fragile dependence. You know, you don't feel very robust. You're going to go to pieces if you get really critical feedback. You don't deal well with failure. Okay. All right. So those are the dimensions, and those are how the questions load onto them. Okay. So creativity, as I say, for example, they all mean quite specific things. It's easy to read a lot more into the words than they actually mean, because they only mean what those questions are getting you to think about. Okay. For those of you who are interested, there is an underlying structure to the whole approach, which you can read all about. Obviously, I'll give you these slides afterwards, which shows that mindful agency sits at the center and it drives very strongly in a positive way these 4 down here. And then we have collaboration and belonging up here. So just in case you are curious to understand the underlying structure of the diagnostic survey. Okay.
Can I just ask a question about those numbers in there, or do I have to read the whole thing?
Yeah, it's too complex.
Okay.
It's a structural equation model,
Yeah.
and this is showing to what extent each drives the other constructs. So you can't be high on curiosity if you're not also high on mindful agency, for example, right? So it's a way of quantifying how the different variables are connected to each other.
And was that for the whole population of the 4,000? Is that, or would individuals have differences in how that diagram?
That's from the entire data set they had of about 40,000 profiles.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Now, when you use this with your students, you also get cohort level reports. So you don't get to see every student's profile. That's their property and they can share it if they want. Okay. But you do get to see the shape of the whole cohort. So you get to see, are they looking, low, medium, or high on each of those constructs? And if you saw, students, a lot of students down at the low end of something, that could be rather interesting for you. You might want to think about the approach you're going to take, the tone you take, etc. And there are also sort of slightly more statistical reports that show you the spread of the students across the different dimensions. So if you understand what box plots look like, but you don't have to get into the stats too much, but you can see, that's probably the more intuitive one, but some people like to see the more detailed view as well. Something else that we've done is when you've got large numbers, you can start to do some statistics that make sense. So you can look to see, for example, in this case, we had 920 students who did a pre-test and a post-test. So they get a profile at the beginning, and then they do another profile at the end. It might be the end of the semester, for example. And you look to see what's changed. So you could see whether they are reporting in general an increase in something. We can also do this kind of analysis which says, have we got distinctively different shapes and sizes of profile? And you can see, again, these are quite high numbers, and we're looking at down here, for example, 548 students. This is the sort of collective profile that these students have, all reporting themselves as quite low on quite a few of these dimensions. Or these students here, generally good, but for some reason, a low sense of belonging. Over here, students with lower creativity and curiosity. Okay, so again, that tells you something quite interesting about your cohort. And we can slice and dice this by faculty and program and so forth.
Are you also able to do that by international students?
Yes, we could if we joined up the data around domestic versus international. Yeah. So those are research questions, and we would go through research ethics and so forth to explore those different questions. But these are certainly important questions to ask. Okay.
About those 4 breakups, could I ask a question about the 4 breakups there, Simon?
I'm going to need to move on, Mark.
Okay.
Okay, because I'm not going to get through the material. Because I want to just explain that learning power is also just part of what's supported in the whole Learning Journeys platform. Okay. So Learning Journeys is available to all students and staff indeed, and it's used with staff development workshops and things too. And it's linked from the student portal for online study. You can see the Learning Power link there. And when you go on a learning journey through this platform, it actually has 4 steps where you think about what your purpose is that you want to accomplish by embarking on this inquiry. And then you do the learning power profile. And then you get stuck into whatever your assignment is, your project. Okay. So doing what they call doing the job is the task at hand. All right. And then you can redo the profile and think about what it means that it seems to have changed in size or shape. Okay. So the point is, you have to do this job, whether you're a professional, a member of staff, or a student, whatever your context is, but you are reflecting actively on the particular aspects of your learning power that you've chosen to work on. So there's some metacognition and reflection going on, even as you get stuck into whatever your job is. All right. So choosing your purpose, you get an interface that looks like this at the moment. You know, what do you want to work on, improve, or develop? Okay, and this is just a toy example. Okay. What difference will it make if you're successful? So it's trying to get somebody to think about their purpose. Then you do the survey. And then you get a report back, which is customized to your profile. So you can see, you can see from your profile, there's a fair bit of room for you to improve in this dimension of belonging. Okay. Is that something you want to work on? Okay. And then it starts to list some suggestions, and there are other resources which we make available to the students, which I'll show you briefly at the end. Encouragement to reflect on your profile. And then you can set yourself what we call a sort of stretch target, where you grab the profile and say, I'd really like to work on my belonging in this case. All right. There's my stretch targets that I've set myself. And then you set some objectives about what you want to work on. So, if I had grabbed sense making and curiosity, then the system logs that, and then we continue. And now you get stuck into whatever your project is. Okay. But all the time reflecting on your sense making and your curiosity, or whatever it was you chose to work on, and trying to put in place some of the strategies that you have been exploring in the resources. And then afterwards, you can do it at the end and see whether it's changed shape. Okay. And reflect again on that. Okay. So that's how the learning power diagnostic fits into the overall learning journey, which is ideally a project that the student wants to do. I mean, it might be that they've just been told to do this, but ideally they've got a degree of agency about the project they're choosing because they actually want to do it. And they're being given a tool and a language to reflect on how they are going about doing that. To what extent are they becoming a better learner by trying to put this into practice? So success is not just getting a distinction in my project. Success is also learning more about how I tackled it and becoming more aware of myself as a learner. It might even be that in the end, when you redo the survey, you assess yourself and you think actually you're less curious than you thought you were. So this is why it's so important that this is not treated in any way as some kind of summative grade. Because if you're being brutally honest, maybe you overestimated yourself the first time, right? As you become more self-aware, you may actually see yourself more clearly, and you may answer the questions more cautiously than you did first time around. The whole point is not to show that you got bigger and better, because individuals are so very different, and there may be all sorts going on in your life. The point is, you have a lower sense of belonging than you did at the start of the semester because something's happened. Or that you've got more curious, and you can make sense of that, right? The whole point is it's deeply about sense making and gaining insight into yourself. But if we have 900 students all reporting an increase in some dimension, that of course starts to iron out the individual differences you get in people's lives. And that's why we can do statistics on it and say that this looks like a meaningful shift of some sort. You see what I mean? So we have to be very careful about the individual and their story and their journey and what's going on in their lives, and what happens when you've got a whole cohort showing a particular pattern. They're different kinds of rationalities, almost different ways of making sense of the data. All right. So this would never be used as a sort of punitive performance review type thing, where by getting smaller, you're doing worse, because individuals have got too much going on in their lives, right? It's only useful as a formative tool for gaining self-insight and helping you construct a story for yourself about what your learning journey is going, how it's going at the moment. And if you're getting smaller in certain respects, but you understand why, that's good news. Okay. All right, a few examples of how this is being integrated into teaching. Okay, there are some links on the bottom here. You can see this is Anne Gardner back in 4 years ago, at least, 2017. She ran a session describing how she invented some learning power personas. Okay, this is a technique we developed and shared with Anne, where you invent fictional students who have archetypal profiles, right? And you can give these out to students and ask them to think about themselves and whether they're a bit like that student. It doesn't matter, you can't read that. I'll show you another example in a minute, okay? And then she gets students to think about themselves, and they're just doing a whiteboard exercise here, thinking about how they might, what they might suggest to this fictional student about what she could do to improve her learning power profile. All right. So here's Daniel. Here's one of the archetypes, and they're just thinking themselves into Daniel's shoes and strategies Daniel might think about adopting. All right. Completely different. These are pre-service teachers going into schools for the first time. Pretty scary stuff. And again, they're doing learning power as part of that experience. And you can see a bit of a quote here that the student in this case wanted to work on their profile, and they showed great improvement in belonging and hope and optimism. And they felt that that was meaningful. The sense of belonging, I believe, has helped reshape me as a learner and has reflected in my shift towards more open readiness. Okay, less fragile and dependent. In the Master of Data Science and Innovation, which we were running in 2015, this was the first transdisciplinary postgraduate program. We introduced learning power in the first week or two as a sort of induction kind of activity with some reflective writing as well for the students to make sense. This was one example of a student. You can read more on the website link there. After doing the survey, she was both embarrassed, surprised, and amazed because it was telling her things that she recognized, but it had taken her quite a long time to realize. And she felt that the tool was reflecting back to her something that was true about herself, as well as giving her resources to tackle that. Okay. So simply by providing this language, we're moving to learning about learning. We're moving to metacognition. We're giving people something to grapple with instead of lack of clarity about why they're struggling. Okay. Okay, and finally, we don't just give people their profile and say, deal with it, of course. There's a whole bunch of resources to help people make sense of this. And these are both individual as well as joint resources. So there's this whole website, learningjourneys.uts, which has got the introduction to the approach. You can direct students to that. They can read specific sections. We have 2-page handy guides on how you could tackle each of the different dimensions. You can look at videos from students and staff. So this is an example of a video where this is in the business school, master's project, capstone. As part of their capstone project, they were asked to reflect on their learning power and create a video about whether they found it useful or not. So obviously, there's no point telling students, "Thou shalt find this useful." I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, and some students don't like it. This video here, the student gave us permission to share, where he talks about what he learned through it. One of the most powerful techniques is what we call coaching triads. So you get into a threesome and you take it in turns to be the coach, the coachee, and an observer. Okay. Now that might seem like an intimidating thing to ask you to do, because he's like, well, who am I to be a coach? You know, I've only just encountered this thing. But as the coach, you are not the expert. The coaches ask open questions, and we have a whole list of examples of questions you can ask, which are open, what we call open, honest questions. You're simply prompting the coachee to reflect on their profile and talk about something that strikes them, something they're finding surprising, etc. Okay. And we do this in face-to-face contexts, but it can be done in Zoom as well. And the observer simply observes and then reflects back anything that struck them about the interaction. And then you rotate round to the next. Very, very practical. It can be done, you know, in half an hour, 10 minutes each. You don't even have to show your profile. That's how honest and open the questions from the coach are. The coach is not scrutinizing your profile and asking you awkward questions about something. The coach may not even be able to see the profile if you choose not to share it. Okay? So it's meant to be a safe experience. Of course, you've got to have the courage to get into a threesome with some people that you're willing to chat to, but it can be extremely powerful. Okay? And you can see the 3 rules in the middle there. No advising, no fixing, no helping. We are not here to sort you out and give you a better profile and help you figure out what's wrong. That's for you to figure out. So it's very much in a sort of coaching, mindset here. It's got to be safe for students to do who may potentially be feeling vulnerable. Okay. So all of these resources are on the website, and students can choose the ones they feel most comfortable with. You might choose to actively encourage them to get into triads if they're minded to, and we've seen that work very well. I said we had stories about fictional students. Here's one. It's in a Word document, which you can download from the website. So here's one about Hong Yan. Okay, and she has an archetypal profile of somebody who does what's told, what she's asked to do. No, you know, very happy to do that. But when she's faced with more open-ended challenges, doesn't have a single right answer, then that's deeply unsettling for her. She doesn't really know how to tackle it or what's expected of her. The rules have been sort of whipped away, and she feels very uncertain. Okay, so that's a fictional archetype, though, that we developed working with academics, asking them, tell us about the kinds of students you deal with. Okay, and it was this set of archetypes that Anne Gardner took and customized for engineering. Okay, that the business school took and put into business clothes and created little stories about different kinds of managers. All right, here's Giles. Here's Cleo, different profiles, different stories. Again, just to help the students think themselves into whether they're a bit like Giles. Okay. Just to mention that this is used in leadership development as well. It's part of the HR framework we have here at UTS. And on the website, there are 3 videos from the managers at Hunter Water who have been using this for their own leadership development, talking about how they, as just regular managers, use this to think about how they could create more of a learning mindset for themselves and for their teams. All right. Okay. That's all I wanted to blast you with. It's quite a lot, I appreciate. But this is just the conversation starter. We've got a few minutes before 4 for you to just feedback any questions or thoughts you have. But obviously, if you want to think about integrating it into your teaching practice or your professional practice, then very happy to talk one-on-one as a follow-up. Thanks very much. I'll stop recording now as well.